this is a state system in which you have entry is essentially widespread and free, and the result of it is the quality of the schooling that is given is very low. It's a place where people go to have a good time, not to have an education. It's a nice interlude between high school and the real world. And it's because, let me ask you something. Do you really think that people appreciate something they don't pay for?
I didn't pay for my higher education, and I certainly appreciate it.
You're one of the rare people.
That's not my impression. My impression.
You will agree that in general,
as a general principle of life, certainly.
People, if they don't pay for it, if they get it for nothing, they value it at nothing. And what happens is that insofar as there are any large number of people like that, any large number of kids who go to college just because it's an easy, cheap, free, pleasant thing to do, it destroys it for the ones who would like to get something.
Yes.
Whenever you're giving away, whenever the government is giving away things instead of simply redistributing money, obviously there are inefficiencies. Anything that's free, like people use too much water if their water isn't metered. Higher education, no doubt, suffers from the same fact. I want to get to something else that Tom Sowell said, this analogy to socialism, which is one of the things that sticks in my craw. As I said at the beginning, obviously, there are levels of redistribution that are nightmares. And I do not think you can analogize from socialism to the progressive income tax.
No, you missed the point entirely. I was saying that you're making the argument that they're making, which is, this is a wonderful idea. It's just that when we come to specific examples of it, it always ends up in disaster.
Well,
and yet somehow it still remains a wonderful idea. You mentioned California. I taught there. There's another reason for the problems of the California system, and that is that the people who are in a position to appropriate the rents, as we say, do so, namely the faculty. That these are research factories. These are not teaching places. I can remember in faculty meetings, whenever I would mention the students or the taxpayers, there'd be a knowing smile as if, oh, Sowell has this thing, you know, and they would tolerate it and go on because it is run for the professors. I was on the faculty.
But is it your impression that private universities such as Harvard, Yale, and Princeton are not run for the professors to the same degree?
Not to the same degree. They are run for the professors, again, because all of them are also getting government money.
But surely it's not just that. It's because they're large bureaucratic institutions.
No. But before the government money got there, you had much higher teaching loads. For example, at Columbia, when Boston wrote this book about the teacher in the 1940s, he mentioned the teaching load at Columbia was 15 semester hours. A rural college out in the boondocks with no reputation at all would not have people teaching like that. As you poured more government money in, you got more and more people doing less and less teaching.
If we can get off the issue of universities and get back to the issue for a moment of income redistribution.
A fact of life, a fact of history. The greatest period of eleemosynary activity in United States history was in the 19th century when government was very small. That's when the great bulk of the private colleges and universities were founded. Harvard was even earlier, of course. That's when you had the Red Cross, the Boy Scouts, you name one after another.
Yes, but Milton, there were the level of services to the poor, the level of redistribution, if you want to call it that went on in the 19th century was obviously far lower than it is today. There was not health care for the poor universally, or even approaching what we have today. There was not education for the poor that there is today. Now, if you want to say, if you want to say that the government should not be involved in these forms of redistribution, I think you should have the courage of your convictions and say and recognize that the redistribution will not take place and not sort of hide behind the hope that private eleemosynary efforts
I don't agree with your interpretation of the
take care of
facts.
it.
The great private non-profit hospitals were all founded in the 19th century. In many ways, the poor had better access, the very poor. The saying used to be when I was growing up, this was a long, long time ago, before we had this great development back in the 1920s. The standard saying was the very poor can get good medicine, the very rich can get good medicine. The people in between are the ones who are squeezed.
Look, our healthcare system is a mess, and for many reasons.
It is a mess, I agree.
Because it's not free market. But it's, and I have to defer to your expertise, but I find it very hard to believe that the poor had better access to health care in the 19th century than they have today.
Well, let me give you another example. The immigrants who came from Europe, my parents and other people, there were very active and effective eleemosynary institutions to help them out, to enable them to get started.
Is fairness not at issue at all? Should we just give up on this notion, Dr. Sowell?
Well, it depends what you mean by fairness. If you're talking about fairness as opportunity, certainly, but that's wholly different from the notion of redistributing. I'm appalled at the notion that there's some people out there who are permanently called the poor, as if they're born with a scarlet P on their forehead. The great thing that's happened for the poor in this country is they stopped being poor. And they stopped being poor because you did not have the government control of the markets that we're so slowly building up. And as you've now begun to add that, now we're talking about permanent underclasses. And again, the people who are saying these wonderful things don't ask, how did it work out? What happened?
My point is a sort of much more elementary one than that. Where you end up in life's rat race is, to a large degree, a function of luck.
Absolutely.
It is not
Absolutely.
a function of talent is luck. As you point out, inherited wealth, inherited talent, same thing.
Yeah.
It is fate. And it seems to me that given that, if there is a way to mitigate fate somewhat with minimum damage to the economy, to the total production of the economy, that is a very good thing to do.
Agreed. Agreed. There's
No,
no
you-
So you
disagreement.
don't have any problem with it in principle. It's only in practice that you
No,
have.
no. I have the difference between us is altogether different. The difference between us is, I think, that you are more likely to achieve that, far more likely to achieve that, with a minimal state and a minimal government than you are with a big government. That the private economy, that the market should not be interpreted so narrowly. It includes charitable activity. It was an expression of market activity when Carnegie established private libraries all over the country. It was a mark of private activity, and a market activity when these nonprofit hospitals were established. What my argument is, that a more effective means of achieving our common objectives, our objectives are the same. I agree with you. Where people end up is tremendously amount of luck.
I hope you've enjoyed Free to Choose and that you'll continue to think about the ideas we've discussed and the way they affect your lives.